All right. You see that?
Yes.
First slide? Okay, great.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so, right, so analyze potential value and recommend solution. Estimate potential value of each design option. Establish which potential solution is most appropriate. So when I think of this, to me, this is like the process of determining what solution most closely aligns with the business's financial strategy. And so we want to make sure we pick a solution that has the closest fit that then, of course, gives us the greatest chance of project success. So, when I've done this in the past, we always had a well-established set of criteria that this needed to pass through. So we made sure we had a strong decision-making process, and then we tried to ensure that, we had the resources available to do what we wanted to do. So, so it's saying here, this describes how to estimate and model potential value delivered by a set of requirements and design options, but those are just some other things that we have to consider too. Process is definitely iterative. So, for example, maybe you pick a solution, but I know in my experience what would happen is you pick something, but it has different pieces to it, and then we move along and we determine that, well, there's this one particular piece that needs to be improved upon or isn't working quite well, so we have to go back and maybe reevaluate that as we move along. Planned event or triggered by modification or change, right? So in the world of being a BA, there's always the chance that you have a stakeholder that comes along with a new requirement, or it might be something that's just as we're moving along, there's some issue that comes across, and we have to step back and take a look at things. Include consideration of uncertainty and estimates. I'm sure we're going to kind of have that. Any questions on this? Or so, like I said before, I mean, my background's pretty focused. I know we have different backgrounds, so if you have anything else to add, please feel free.
This is Heather. I hope you can hear me. I think I got
Sure.
myself off mute. When I see this section, I mean, I kind of think that, is this borderline design? Like, I'm just trying to figure out how a BA would recommend the solution. Is this the solution of the requirements that's being written, or when technology presents a solution from the requirements, helping pick the choice? Maybe I'm missing something.
Latter. Yeah, I don't think it's as much you're involved with design. It's more like saying, okay, we have different options. How are we going to estimate the value of the different options?
I mean, I do this at my work.
Okay.
I guess I was thinking it was, I guess I do kind of look at their design, and if they have, I do review all the design that they do. I do review what they're, they're going to develop, and make sure it meets my requirement needs. I mean, I guess that's part of this, right? Like if they say, here's the solution, and this is going to provide this value or that value, I guess that's what this is. All right. I mean, I do that. I just wanted to make sure I was clear what this really meant.
No, you bring up a good point, because if you're actually evaluating design, and I haven't done that so much recently. I've done that in the past. And I guess now that I think of it, we did do some, for the implementation we're doing recently, we did evaluate architecture. But we were kind of given one of two choices, and it was more, okay, how does choice A going to perform versus choice B? So really the kind of decision was made for us because one performed better than the other, and that's the option we went with. And really the only additional criteria we had to choose was, well, okay, if we went with this option, we had one additional server versus another option. So that's kind of an easy decision. Maybe in your case it might be you're comparing different designs, and it might get more complicated.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we talk about value. We have here finance, reputation, impact in the marketplace. This second bullet here may include increase or decrease in value or mix. That's interesting. I'm not aware of making a decision that could cause a decrease in value unless it's trying to say that we're making a decision that increases value overall and then maybe a decrease in part of it. But I would assume that a lot of this criteria, when we talk about finance, reputation, impact, my experience has been that's been established at the portfolio level. So then, my job would be more to prioritize and analyze different solution options. For example, examining different vendors. Because in pharma, there's there's a lot of different cost options for the types of systems we implement. So, we would prioritize, analyze those solution options, and then try to come up with one that most closely met what was already established by portfolio. But so I guess what I'm trying to say, it's not something as a BA I've had to necessarily define. It's kind of there. All right, so options are evaluated by comparing options of one design to another. Then each has its pros and cons. Right, so in other words, we would, if we're evaluating different options, we would make sure that we had our different criteria. We might put weights to those criteria. And then as we start to evaluate the different options, we might get demos or I guess if you work in an agile environment, maybe you're doing more prototyping or storyboarding or whatnot. But the bottom line is each has a mix of pros and cons. And so you're going to want to capture that. And of course, you may be your best option. That's usually the case. It's not always an easy decision, or there may be a clear winner. Usually in my case, it's always hard. It's never usually a slam dunk. Then when there's no best option, then do we not do anything, or do we continue to refine this? So whenever I'm involved in this task, I make sure I involve key stakeholders who need to be in this decision process. This is not something that I think, well, what I think I've heard that happens, although this is not something that, this is something I make sure doesn't happen, is that IT may make decisions on their own about solutions and say, well, this is what the business needs. That's something I never do. I make sure that we've got the subject matter experts involved, because I need to ensure that someone with the expertise in the problem we're trying to solve is involved in this step. And then so my job as a BA is to facilitate this process. Because this is not something you want to screw up. This is an important decision you have to make. Any questions?
Not for me.
Okay. All right.
Nope.
All right. So like I was saying earlier, the input-output diagrams are things that I've used. Well, let's say I've looked at them, but then when I would actually go through the practice test, that's when I think it really sunk in. Because even though when you look at it here, it seems intuitive. What are your inputs? You have potential value. What value, just like we're saying earlier, what value are we trying to achieve? What are different options? We do the analysis, we have a recommendation, and then change strategy would use this. And the other guidelines and tools. Okay, that's fine. That kind of makes sense looking at this, but there's so many of these in the BA box that I think it's really hard to sit down and just try to memorize it all. So again, I think going through the practice questions helps a lot of this sink in a way that you'll be able to understand when taking the test.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Okay. So, okay, potential value can be used as a benchmark against which value for design can be evaluated, and design options need to be evaluated. Need to be evaluated one against another to recommend one option for solution. So this may or may, like I was saying before, you may have a COTS product, you may be developing something, so it may or may not be a finished product. So for example, if this is something that will be developed internally, then maybe all you have to start with is, instead of user stories or use cases or storyboards, if you're looking to purchase a COTS product, then you should be able to consolidate things in a questionnaire, such as, give me an overview of the product, how mature is the product, how long has it been in use, how many existing customers, what's it designed for, like, for example, what capability are we trying to satisfy, what the costs are, such as licensing hardware, configuration, based on requirements, etc. So I think all of these things need to be factored in. There really can be a lot. So the point being is, you may get a demo of Ferrari, and distance may want a Ferrari, but if it's a really new product and it may be buggy and it's a vendor that's new to the market and it's expensive, may not be the direction you want to go. So those are different things we would have to take into consideration. And being in pharma, they tend to be more conservative and tend to go with products that have been around for a while.
Yep.
All right. Expected benefits. Describe positive value a solution is intended to deliver. So value means benefits, reduce risk, compliance, improve user experience, and other positive outcomes. So now we're beginning the process of analyzing each option. And like I was saying earlier, what I've found to be helpful is have a matrix that contains the different options. So like, for example, across the top, you might have different categories such as cost, benefits, risk, implementation complexity, and probability of success. And then maybe these high-level categories can be further decomposed into more specific criteria, and then a weight can be assigned to each. And then once you narrow it down to a few options, you can expand on it further if you need to, and just continue to perform that analysis until you think you've come to a decision. And then what you want to make sure you do is, when you feel that you're ready to package this information up and present it, make sure that, and I'm sure you've come through this before, but when you present it to the key stakeholders that have purse strings or higher ups, they like stuff to be very simple and high level. So just make sure that you can back it up with details, but give them the kind of the high level picture. I find sometimes one of the mistakes I've made in the past is just I'll dive right into the details and I'll start to lose people. So,
Yep.
just something to think about. Okay. So, expected cost. So we have to think about negative value when you get into costs, right? So how much is it going to cost to buy this? And negative effects on stakeholders. So what's the cost of their time? Not only the time in the solicitation sessions, even though it's kind of funny money and internal costs, it's still going to be time away from the day jobs. Then there's also time involved with training and any change management that has to happen in order to ensure that they're effective. Any SOPs you have to update. There's always internal costs. And then, of course, the operational costs to maintain over time. And that's very important. That's something where I personally have been kind of bit in the past where, so, I'm really enthusiastic and I dive into requirements and I'm talking to everybody and I develop this great set of requirements and, we get all these capabilities and whatnot, and then we realize, well, there's a cost of ownership we haven't factored in. So that's something that's important to consider. And then, of course, we talk about timeline, effort, things like that. I mean, all these things I think are pretty standard, all the things in this list. But some things I'm not seeing here, which maybe are implied, are development and configuration costs. So if there's a COTS product and you want to deviate from that somewhat, how much it's going to cost to change and configure that. Again, as I mentioned before, when you're implementing a solution, there's definitely costs in terms of change management. Okay. Any questions? So far, so good?
Yep, good.
Pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah, I think these sections are. Expected cost. So cost for design option cost for a design option consider cumulative cost of design components. So I guess what they're meaning by that is, I guess if you're putting something together in design in these different pieces, you have to just make sure they kind of fit together, and it's not just the sum is greater than the whole of its parts. Opportunity cost, of course, is something to consider. If I choose option A, then I'm not choosing option B. What am I giving up? And then you also have not only just the cost in terms of choosing solution A versus solution B, but then now resources internally from a project standpoint are going to have to be dedicated to implementing that versus another solution as well. And the other thing too, when it comes to opportunity cost, one thing I've learned is that sometimes the value of the best opportunity is not sorry, let me say that again. Sometimes the best option that you might think is the best option is not selected. Sometimes a lighter option is what ends up being selected. I guess that's what I'm trying to say from a technology standpoint, and then more processes wrapped around it. And again, this could be for different reasons. Maybe there's risk involved. Maybe implementing automation comes with all these upfront costs as we see. Maybe we're not ready to, we don't have the funds to do that right now. And again, as I mentioned before, there's all these different things you have to consider. So, and maybe the end user value just isn't good enough to go that route, and maybe something you have to defer. Or maybe there's certain functions you have to defer and can't necessarily. We don't want to take the risk of over-engineering it right now. So, determine value, potential value to stakeholders based on the benefits cost, as we're saying. Value of the enterprise typically outweighs the value of any single stakeholder, and sometimes that's an education process with the different stakeholders. You're kind of like, why are we doing this again? And you have to, kind of say, well, here's the overall benefit. Other times I've had situations where the business would come to me with open arms, and that's always great. I seem to get their time and potentiality where that happens. Sometimes the potential value is uncertain. Sometimes it's like, okay, we just want to do this. And so, okay, we make our estimates of cost and benefits, and then we realize there's a degree of uncertainty. I guess just to add to this, like I said, you want to make sure your stakeholders fully understand the impact of the solution, and you want to make sure you handle this by way of just answers to specific questions regarding current versus future state, using some of the techniques we'll talk about below. And again, you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're just diving into detailed requirements for a solution when not all the user's assumptions or expectations have been clarified, or where not all the current state processes have been identified. I've had that happen before too, where we're rolling along and maybe even have something implemented, and it's like, oh, by the way, there's this process over here, and you have to factor that in late in the game. And then that means more costs have to be taken into consideration. So again, you don't want something that's over-engineered, it's expensive to maintain, the change management ends up being cumbersome. Right. Okay, next slide. So we assess our design options and recommend a solution. So each design option is assessed based on potential value to be delivered. May need to reevaluate if there are benefits. So I guess we need to determine if perhaps a different evaluation approach is needed, or if maybe we have missing criteria, or if we need to expand our options. And as cost and effort are understood for each design option, I don't think efforts are understood for each design option. So we evaluate each design option to ensure that it represents the best trade-offs. Factors include available resources, constraints. Okay, so regulatory is a key one here. Again, I mentioned before, I work in regulated environments. This may force a certain solution. The business may have to spend money. Now, when this happens, this is where your decision criteria, I think, becomes important, because since there may be options out there that you can implement that meet your regulatory requirements, but you may not have to break the bank. That's where you really got to do your research. And then I guess, research limitations, of course, include the lack of time and money given the priority solution. And then you have limited value requirements, the last bullet here. So you may have requirements that are low priority on their own, but for whatever reason are necessary so that more mission-critical requirements can be implemented. That usually isn't too much of a problem for me. I don't know if it's a problem for either one of you, but usually what ends up happening more often is the business is like, oh yeah, everything's critical. These are all critical requirements, and so I have to kind of get them to turn things down because, you can say everything's critical, but then what happens when you start testing and certain things don't work, and you still have a certain deadline you need to meet, and that's when the real priorities may start to come out. All right. Test design options and recommend solutions. So other considerations include relationships with vendors. Hopefully they're good. Sometimes they're good and they turn out to they will not be so good for whatever reason. Sometimes vendors change. I've had that happen to me. They grow and take on a different dynamic. Dependencies on other initiatives, of course, corporate culture and sufficient cash flow. And corporate culture, the BA really can be, I can tell you my experience, that can make a huge difference being in different environments. So there may be other projects in a portfolio which have a higher priority. So, maybe the best solution ends up being a longer-term answer that's something we just have to defer. So the option for now might not be to, so the option might be ideal for no other constraints, but we have to settle on something small or maybe deferring it due to other external factors. All right, so now we have our guidelines and tools. I guess we'll just go through this kind of quickly because these things, I think, they kind of, with these guidelines and tools and the techniques, they're going to give you the whole 9 yards. They're going to tell you every possible tool and technique you could use, and really it all depends. So obviously you're going to pick the ones that make sense. Business objectives, that's great if you have that. Use the calculate benefit. Hopefully, when you come on a project, if you're not, part of your project's not to define this, when you're doing implementation, hopefully this has been well defined and defined in a way you can trace to that. Current state description versus future state. I find I'm usually the one who ends up having to figure these things out, which is fine. First I just use swimlane diagrams and say this is our current state, and then future state. I've used swimlane diagrams, and my boxes in there end up being use cases, but there's a lot of different ways to do this, of course. Risk analysis, finding a level of risk. So there's project risk, and that's typically done by, in my case, the account manager, the project manager. The risk that I do is more requirements level risk, and in pharma there's a thing called GANT, Good Automated Manufacturing Practice, and that actually has kind of a cookbook way of calculating risk. So I've done that a few times. And solution scope, we want to make sure we have that on the scope of the whole solution. So if you can get it all up front, that's great, because that seems to be a slippery slope sometimes. Scope tends to change, and our jobs tend to be managing that and keep them in control. A lot of times what I find myself end up doing is I have requirements, and I just say, okay, this is going to be deferred. For not removing the requirement, it's going to be deferred for future release. So we do that exercise. Acceptance and evaluation criteria. So I guess in more an agile environment, this might be user stories. Being in pharma, we like to have test scripts. So what I'll do is I'll develop use cases which turn into UAT scripts, and that ends up being our acceptance criteria. Backlog management, again, I guess it's more if you're in an agile and using that to prioritize. Brainstorming, that's something We do that a lot as needed. Usually brainstorming happens when we have a problem. We got to get everybody together and get a target team and try to figure it out. And business cases used to assess recommendations against goals and objectives. So, most of the business cases that I've come across are not as good as. So, the former president of the IIBA, Ken Fulmer, who's now the president of all of IIBA right now, did a really good presentation a few years ago on business cases. If you're interested, I can send you the deck on that. Just the way he laid it out, the way it was structured was really impressive. But I've yet to see something that good. Usually it's more, we want to do this, here's how much money we have, here's how long we think it's going to take to make it happen. But if you have a good business case or if you have the opportunity to do one, I think that's gold.
Yeah, that would be great if you could share that. We do struggle with our business cases. We try in all different ways, but I agree. Your business case really has to be very, very solid.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, business model canvas. That's something I've seen in the BA block. It's not something, I think I saw a presentation on it. It's not something I've used. I can't really speak to it from a pragmatic standpoint, but you can read about it.
Heather, can you speak to that? I'm just wondering, Heather, do you have any experience with that? I wondered what that was.
What was that? I'm sorry.
The business model canvas. Do you know what that is?
I've never heard of it, honestly. I've heard of business models, but not the canvas.
Yeah, me either. Okay.
Yeah, that's, I guess you'd have to read about it in the BA block. I think I read about it a while ago. But it's one of those things, I guess you got to use it to really be able to speak to it. I've heard good things about it, though. Decision analysis, so I guess that's when you get into, like, your decision tree or fishbone diagrams. Estimation, of course. Typically, I'm asked to provide estimates, and I'll go to developers and try to get estimates. And if you have a good development team, they'll give you good estimates. If you have a vendor development team that, your experience has done this, but mine has, to give an estimate and it just doesn't happen. Things drag out longer than they should. Or a lot of times what happens to me is I end up getting it. So I typically, in the first one, who does scenario testing. So I'll get it and I'll end up testing it and things will be broken and give it back to them. And it's don't always fit the reality, but hopefully get good estimates. Financial analysis, a lot of that tends to be a function of how the groups that I work with, how much money they're just given. So I guess they try to go out and get money based on what they want to do, and higher up say, okay, here's how much money you have, and based on that, that's how much money we can run with, and that determines our scope. I'm not really, to be honest with you, one who's involved with calculating ROI. I think I would be interested in being in one of those sessions because sometimes I question it, but obviously you want to, to me it's kind of a no-brainer. You want to get the biggest bang for your buck. Then, of course, you have projects where maybe the ROI is not huge, but for regulatory or compliance reasons, you have to do it. Focus groups, so I see that as different. What are we trying? We're probably trying to solve one based on that. That's who we're going to have involved in a focus group. So that's the stakeholders. Do we need to get users involved? Do we need to get infrastructure involved? Do we need to get usually a project manager is involved in both cases? Do quality involved? And a lot of times quality is also involved, which gets stakeholder inputs on these different things based on what we're trying to solve for. Interviews, it's kind of obvious. The interviews stakeholders are needed, and depending on the project, sometimes I'll do interviews sporadically. Sometimes I taking users a lot. Just depends on, again, what we're trying to solve for, and the availability of the users. Sometimes I get users that are available, and some are a little bit harder to get a hold of. And then metrics and KPIs. So hopefully we're getting our KPIs. We talked about risks. Surveys or questionnaires, I think that's good when you're dealing with a large audience. Sending out a survey or something that's very cookie cutter, and they can choose one of many options. Obviously, response rate is what's important here. So again, that's if you can get at least after your audience to get your response, I think that's good. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then workshops. I've really only done those when I'm trying to elicit requirements. So not necessarily get input on design, but maybe that can also be a good option to use if there's, I don't know, maybe, I guess in that case, if you're having a workshop with design, it's usually more IT versus a business. Customer represents market segment effective. I don't normally deal with direct customer. My customers are internal, so it's not something I necessarily can speak to as far as market segments. But definitely domain SMEs. We want to definitely use domain SMEs to get their expertise on how they do things and what they're trying to accomplish. And oftentimes domain SME, the end user or their power user, and then your implementation SME. And that might be your tech lead, your account manager if it's an outside vendor, or just maybe just somebody who's an implementation SME, let's say. PMs, I always like to get my PM involved as much as they're willing and able to be involved. I get different types of PMs. It depends on the type of project you're doing, how well it's moving along. Some PMs, PM I'm working with now, he's great. He loves to be in on things. I've had PMs in the past that just want to know, on biweekly status meetings. I want to make sure that I'm in budget and on time. That's it. They don't really care other than that. Regulators, and that's good if you're implementing regulatory solutions, and I'm involved in a lot of that, a lot of QA involvement. All I can say about that is make sure you get them involved up front. Do not get quality involved downstream. Get them involved in all key decisions in the beginning rather than the end. And especially if you have a requirement spec, make sure that they see that requirement spec before you send it out for project meetings. And of course, your sponsors, they're going to want to know how things are going, and they get the final say on everything.
Yeah, we do that at my work. We involve them from the way beginning. That way they know kind of the background of what they're testing, to make sure that they implement the solution. They're also requesting, we didn't used to kind of have detailed review of the requirements. Like they've been part of the meetings and things like that, but they wanted a second review. It seems like the people who test, and if that's what you meant by the quality review, the people who test don't really know the business. So sometimes it's hard for them to grasp, because that's how we write the requirements in business terms. So sometimes it's hard for them to grasp. So it seems like it's always a challenge to make them understand what we're asking for. But I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I apologize. I should have caveated a little bit better. When I think of quality, I think more of someone who's an expert in regulatory and compliance versus a testing. I know what you're saying. You're saying like someone who's charged with QA leading a test team. So, and then sometimes those terms can be used interchangeably. So I agree with exactly what you just said. When you're talking about a test team, in fact, I deal with a lot of times offshore test teams. So it's not only, you're right, not only do they understand the business, but sometimes you even run into, just the language barriers. So what I tend to do in those situations is just present a lot of pictures. And I do that anyway, because what I do for my users is when I use a tool for generating my use cases, but I like to have storyboards, and I'll turn the storyboards into screenshots, and I know it's a lot of work, but then what I do is I render those screenshots in HTML, and I put them out on the team site, and now they have online documentation. So that online documentation I then present to the QA team as well. So not only to give them something they can look at, but pictures speak 1,000 words. All right, and then in the end you have your solution recommendation. Identify suggested most appropriate solution. And hopefully you chose the right one at the point after doing all that work. All right. So that's end of chapter 7. So we can, like I said, there's only just Davis here. We can move to chapter 8. We can go along. We're not going to, certainly, there's 100 slides in here. We're not going to get through all of this. And so we can just kind of take this subsection, one subsection at a time. And, we can time box it and just, end at maybe the first or second one. That makes sense.
Sounds good.
All right. So, use the different sections here. So chapter 8, task performed to determine how the performance of the solution will be assessed. Assess solution performance, understanding. So we want to understand the value. We want to investigate issues leading to poor performance. We want to investigate issues external leading to poor performance, meaning that I interpret that to say that I've got a solution. There's something outside of it, outside of the immediate solution that's causing some issues, and identify actions that can be taken to increase the value delivered by the solution. So, so the bad box states that this describes tasks that BAs perform to assess the performance of, and the value delivered by a solution that's in use by an enterprise. And then recommend, removal of barriers and so on and so forth. So when I think of in use, that may be something that's in production, or maybe it's a partial solution, or maybe it's something that's even a prototype. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's implemented. It's something that we're saying this is a solution. Now we're evaluating. And I would think if you have a prototype or proof of concept, and that's something that on my current project we're doing that right now, your job is to evaluate that and make sure that everything's working. So it's something that might be in a sandbox environment. One of the things that I like to do is, if it's a cost product, is I say to the vendor, okay, before you bring this in our environment, I want to see this in a sandbox. I want to go through our scenario test in your environment and make sure it even works in your environment. And I like to demo it to the business in their environment before it gets in our environment. And I like to use the feedback from the business as part of the evaluation. So I might be able to evaluate it mechanically and say, is this meeting stated requirements? Is this meeting any, are there any defects here? But I want the business to see to make sure it's going to meet the needs. And then, once they install it in a development environment, then at that point it's more of a pilot or a beta release. So again, at that point we still want to do what I do is at that point when it's in development, then I will dry run it, and then I also have the business do a UAT dry run. So I think this is kind of important in situations where it's regulated environments and you need to do formal testing. Our typical SDLC will have you do UAT at the end. Well, that's fine if you want to do it from a formal standpoint, but to have the business look at it and evaluate it at the end after you've done formal testing, I think is a huge mistake. I think the business needs to be involved with a UAT dry run before any formal testing happens. I think it's critical. We're doing that right now as we speak, and there's value in that. We're getting feedback iteratively that way. So even though we can't do like a true agile implementation, we try to use elements of it, and we feed that back to the vendor and try to, we prioritize at that point and say, okay, we're doing our evaluation, and here's what we've come up with, and can you do this? Is it a quick hit? Great, we can do that. Is it something that we can't do? If it's something we can't do and it's not that important, we'll defer it. If it's something we can't do and isn't important, that's when we need to kind of huddle and say, okay, can we extend the project? Do we have the money to extend it? Do we, can the business put this in the roadmap in the future? Can the business live without it? And as a BA, do I do my job and help them work around it? So, so I know that's a lot of stuff I just said, but that's, again, this whole section, those are the types of things that I tend to think of at a high level. Any other thoughts or feedback on that?
I agree about, having the users come in as early as possible, because you don't want the big, real big surprises at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Especially if you've done all that work. Okay. So this is one of those diagrams that shows how things relate together. And so it looks like the two main inputs here are strategy analysis and requirements analysis. The design definition, the strategy analysis is probably something that Robbie went over with you earlier. So that's that high-level need and scope definition phase where we're evaluating possible solutions that will help us, will help the enterprise create greater value for its stakeholders. And then, requirements analysis design is all that stuff with, we as BAs do to perform and structure and organize requirements. We discover journal citation and so on and so forth, specify, model, et cetera, et cetera. All right, here's another one of these input-output diagrams. So again, my recommendation, don't try to understand it conceptually and maybe taking some practice tests versus just trying to memorize it. Like the
Yeah, thanks for that tip.
Sure, no problem. Okay,
I
so
started printing them out like individually, thinking that there's not that many in the book, but there's like a huge number.
I learned that the hard way too, don't worry. All right, so sorry, not showing that. There we go. Got it. Okay, so we've got our 4 concepts here. So the first one, recommend a change to either solution or the enterprise in order to realize the potential value. So I guess in this case, the purpose of recommending the change is, of course, to improve the performance of the enterprise, because the need to improve performance has been recognized. Evaluate how a solution or solution component is fulfilling the need. So as I think later on, we'll see that this can happen either when changes over time make an existing solution ineffective or obsolete, or you have new requirements that create the need to evaluate potential solutions that don't currently exist. Our solution, we assess the performance of the solution, examine if it's delivering potential value. If not, determine why. So basically, is our solution satisfying our needs or not? Stakeholder. So we need to have, I find having a stakeholder map is really good in situations where, you're new to, especially in my case, the consultant, if I go to a totally new department. And then try to determine what stakeholders need to be involved, try to figure out their understanding of their existing processes and get their input on solutions we're evaluating, what they need, what they believe needs to change, and their relationship to and their influence over the change being implemented. I find that's pretty important to do. Value, determine if the solution is delivering the potential value, demonstrate why value is not being realized. So this to me is the process of determining if the solution option can achieve the value we're looking for. And so if that's the case, then it's obviously cost effective. And context. Consider the context in determining solution performance measures and any limitations within the context that may prohibit value from being realized. So context, meaning like the overall environment and circumstances we're dealing with, are really important, because a particular solution may work well for one department or organization and may not work for another, for a lot of reasons. So I think that's an important one. Any questions?
No.
All right. Our first section for Chapter 8. Okay. Time performance measures, evaluate the effectiveness of the solution in relation to the value. Okay, so performance measures. So I think in performance measures, some examples would be, does the system meet the requirement as stated when we test it out in our environment? And then, what time and money has been spent on identifying and implementing the solution to meet the business need. So for example, if it's now we're in a situation where it's being tested or used in capacity, how well has it met the need? And evaluating effectiveness. So if the output, of course, the output needs to be greater than the input. So otherwise, what's the point? Then there's also the question of how often we need to determine these metrics. Is this something we need to evaluate on a periodic basis for a lot of different reasons? Or organizations change, business needs change, technology changes. So this is something that the effectiveness we need to evaluate frequently. Something that may have been great 5 years ago, may be obsolete now. Okay, determines the value of a newly deployed or existing solution. So that value, I think, would need to be determined through specific metrics such as KPIs, project goals, improvement targets, software testing. Measurement depends on solution, context, and how the organization defines value. So, which of course then drives how the organization defines value. It depends on, however they define that. That's something that I think very important to know. Assuming you can get that information, of course. And then solutions are evaluated based on built-in performance measures. And then if they don't exist, then the BA works with the stakeholders. So, again, in this case, you want to perform that stakeholder assessment. I think that's really important. And then from there, you can tend to define the measures. Any other thoughts or feedback?
Nope, it makes sense.
Nope.
Right. So the first three here, again, if you're going to document these, I find that these types of things are more in a project charter. So, for example, like in the project I'm on today, it's a imaging management solution. So we have the ability to upload, we want to have the ability to upload a certain amount of data over a certain time period, and maybe that's a limitation that's not in alignment with the growth we expect, right? So today we can do X, tomorrow we want to do Y based on our growth. So we're doing, an upgrade to make sure we can meet this business need and have a stronger upload capability. So that's maybe a specific example, but that's something that we would tend to do up front. Now, the last bullet here, test. You want to, I guess, define your testing approach up front. And, again, being in pharma, we use a quality assurance plan. But that said, I think this is different than the first three from the standpoint that you can have perfectly functioning software from a defect standpoint, but it may have limited value. And then likewise, you have a solution that would be great, but it's just full of defects and we can't go live for it. So I think these are all important, but I think the first three is more in a project chart, and the last one is something you define your test strategy up front, and then that's something that as we move along kind of evolves in the life of the plan. Right, another input-output diagram. So we have our implemented solution and our business objectives, feeding the measuring solution performance. Our output would be our solution performance measures, and then the tasks are analyze current state and analyze performance measures. Okay. All right, so business objectives, measurable results that the enterprise wants to achieve. So, again, as I was saying, I work in the area of content management, so measurable results might be, can a system or solution handle uploading X number of files of Y size in Z time frame? Excuse me. Can we store content in a standard taxonomy? Can we collect the appropriate metadata in order to facilitate searching? or maybe if you have a different type of solution, like if this is an external-facing website, then do we measure it by the number of products or services sold? So the point being is that these should be, now we should be getting into very specific business requirements, not something that's so abstract. That makes sense. Excuse me. My voice here. So, and then our implemented solution. So a solution or component solution that exists in some form. An operating solution. So if there's an operating solution, then we're probably trying to answer questions such as, do we upgrade, or does this get decommissioned because maybe the business changed and therefore the solution is needed and can be replaced with a different option. Prototype, again, that's something that's been developed, which is maybe a shell of the real solution. Well, what the real solution will look like, but there's enough there that we can be assessed to verify value. And then prototype, again, that's something if we're dealing with COTS, meaning we're evaluating different vendors, so we can ask them to provide us with a sandbox, kick the tires on the solution, and perhaps do a demo to users, see how close it meets our statement requirements. All right. Find solution performance measures. So the BAs determine if current measures exist or if methods for capturing them are in place. I think this is very important. So we want to determine what needs to be measured, and if you don't have this, then how are you going to capture them? How are you going to know you're successful? For example, is there any internal standards for this that we can leverage? Or if not, can we somehow find out what other, departments are doing, even our competition's doing, maybe if that information's out there. BAs ensure that any existing performance measures are accurate, relevant, and elicit any additional performance measures identified by stakeholders. So if these things aren't well defined, then maybe you can use one of the requirement solicitation techniques, such as interviews or stakeholder needs surveys to capture this. Business goals, objectives, and business processes are a common source of measures. So, you always want to make sure we're tracing back to our business goals and objectives. And finally, performance measures can be influenced or imposed by third parties such as vendors, government bodies, or regulatory. And again, this is one I deal with a lot. Are there QA and legal mandates? So, for example, there may be a standard set of regulatory or even security requirements that get handed to us, and we have to make sure we meet this no matter what. So these are the type of things that we have to take into consideration when we're defining our performance measures. Is it going to meet these standard requirements that we have to meet? Okay. So type and nature of the measurements are considered when choosing the elicitation method. So I think this is just saying that the inputs you're trying to collect will be a function of what it is that you're trying to measure. And then the type of solution performance measures depend on the value being measured. So we've got quantitative, we've got qualitative, we both. So quantitative, for example, we can conduct interviews with people responsible for our, so for example, in my case, I may conduct interviews with our users and figure out, who's responsible for the content on the project. So what and how much content exists, and what are our content size requirements. Those are a couple of examples. For qualitative, maybe once you've identified the stakeholders, who the stakeholders are, and you determine which stakeholders are empowered to make decisions, elicit from them any issues that need to be addressed and any pain points. So if there's an existing solution, what's cumbersome and what they want to change. So those are some examples I can think of. Any examples you want to share, or anything that maybe I missed that might be another good example?
See, at my work, I don't even think we do this, like using different values or methods to define solution. Oh, I can't really comment, I guess.
So how do you
do
test
anything
the
like this?
Yeah, so how do you test the performance then?
Good question. I think it's more straight. Okay, so I guess I'll just have to, I guess, maybe give examples of what I'm used to dealing with. When I'm dealing with content, it tends to be pretty straightforward from a performance standpoint because you're just trying to say, okay, I'm trying to get this number of files or this files of this size, this format through in a certain time period. Did it meet it, yes or no? When you get into more your qualitative, that's more of maybe, in my experience, is more UI, meaning that you know, you've got interfaces. Are they slow or are they just cumbersome? There's a lot of different steps, you know, that sort of thing. Those are probably the best examples I can come up with.
Yeah, I was thinking of like response time. It could be quantitative. It could be qualitative. Yeah, and with this, I have a big project that I'm working on now, so I'm trying to think of some good examples from the quantitative measures. Yeah, I really can't think of any. We're doing a simulation of a process, and we need to make sure that the solution actually replicates what current state is. So we have to basically put measures in place to say, okay, does it correlate to today's world? So does the cycle time for the process, for example, does the solution provide that exact cycle time that's in today's world? You know, based in the real world environment. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But the qualitative is really hard sometimes.
Yes, agreed. And I think, you know, that's where I think the demos really come to play. Because I may look at something and may think it's fine and not really have an opinion of it. And the users know their process. They know what they need. They know what they need to look at. They know what their pain points are. And so, and it amazes me because I had a stakeholder who, you know, she was really happy about how I would take the time to show the demos and do the documentation and team site. And I'm like, well, that's kind of what like for the type of BA work that I do, you know, being on the IT side, I said, isn't that kind of what should happen? And she's like, no, they have IT teams that say, here's your solution. You need to go figure it out. That's not good. So, so again, I think for me, it's just getting the right stakeholders involved and helping.
Yeah, I agree on the demo idea. In fact, we're relaunching a tool and putting a new branding around it and making some updates to the tool. So one of the things that we're going to do is a voice of customer. We're probably going to do a focus group, like a set of 5 for half an hour each, and go through and give a demo of the tool and the updates that we've made to make sure that it resonates with the community and that the branding resonates.
Okay. No, that's great. All right. Okay. Validate performance measures. Helps ensure assessment of solution performance is useful. So I guess this is, you know, what are the inputs to and corresponding outputs from a particular process that we need to evaluate in order to determine that our expected outcomes of the solution are being met. BAs validate the performance measures and any influencing criteria for stakeholders. So while we work to create these things, again, these should always be verified with our stakeholders. Performance measures should align with any higher level measures that exist within the context affecting the solution. I think one of the first questions from the business perspective should always be, what are we evaluating and why? So again, we should need to set specific, realistic performance goals that trace back to our business case. Sponsor or any stakeholder with decision-making authority decides which measures are used to evaluate solution performance. So that would be our key acceptance criteria, and we need to balance out, what is realistic with any constraints. So that's when we make our cost versus benefit decisions, and we want to make sure we include our sponsors and the key decision makers in that. Okay. Collect performance measures, BAs, facilitate discussions to estimate qualitative/value realized by solution by consulting with stakeholders knowledgeable, of course. So this is a good example where the BA will need to use their skills to work with different types of stakeholders, such as users, infrastructure maybe, again, quality, project managers, account managers. So we need to determine if what the business is asking for is realistic given technology constraints. And technology constraints may not just be, so it might not just be, okay, we can afford a particular solution. It's what technology constraints the business can consume as far in terms of what they can support. Now, I guess as organizations are going to more cloud-based, that might be less of a concern. But definitely something if you're going to do an on-prem solution. And then, we need to determine if what the business is asking for is realistic. And we also need to ensure that, so we need to determine if what the business is asking for is realistic, not only giving technology constraints, but, given our budget, and then what the infrastructure teams are capable of delivering on and what operations can support. EAs may consider the following when collecting quantitative performance measures. I guess this is getting into statistical sampling. So maybe if you're getting into things like kind of manufacturing and Six Sigma, this might be something that fits into that. So again, if what I do, it's more about dealing with content management. How much content do we need to load to ensure it performs well? How many concurrent processes do we have to set up to do our uploads, or what performance tuning do we need to do as we go through these cycles of testing? Okay, and here's our guidelines and tools. Change strategy, an interesting one. I've been involved with change strategy more towards, so just a caveat, change strategy is a whole other, I think, science in itself. It's not something I've done myself. I've worked with people that have done this. This has come about in situations where we've already decided on it and we're kind of, this is what we're doing, and then you get the change strategy group come in and say, okay, now we're going to help you manage your change now that this is coming along. Future state description. So
I have a question.
Sure.
On the change strategy, that's not the same as like change management?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because the term change management, I don't know if you're familiar with ITIL, Information Technology Infrastructure Library, but that's called incident management, problem management, change management, configuration management, and release management. That change management in that case, I think is more technical, meaning that we're now managing our versions of our releases. Whereas there's this kind of change management term that's used in the industry to say, I'm now helping this organization's department manage this change that's coming into play.
So that's interesting. So to me, on the process side, change management means exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
Getting the organization to through the change, everybody on the bus and, working through it.
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. No, I think that's what they're referring to here.
Okay.
Then our future state description. Again, I'm a big believer in capturing current state and defining future state because that helps set the stage for your acceptance testing. What scenarios are we going to go through? So, what are the boundaries of our new modified solution? If it's do an upgrade, hopefully your future state is the previous future state. That's now the current state returning in the future state. So I've done that. I've also been in situations where there is no solution and you have to define the future state. That's much harder. Then we have our validated requirements. So when the requirements are first verified for quality, then validated, meaning that they've gone through the different business stakeholders. So again, that's something you want to have. If you have a solution and you're evaluating it, of course you're evaluating against your requirements. One thing I just again want to say is that being in a regulated pharma industry, we have to develop what's known as a functional requirements spec, and that's the document that says the system shall, the system shall, the system shall. You may not see that in agile environments.
Yep.
That's fine. I see that document really as an output. I see that as kind of the last thing we do as an input into our testing. That document is, I think, a dreadful tool to try and verify requirements of the business. I am very much into developing models and developing, so let's say, for example, you're developing something new, doing use case storyboards. If it's a cost product, doing those demos, and then maybe reverse engineering your use cases, whatever you got to do. I find users, when we call something requirements, I find that's something that any kind of environment, whether you're agile or you're waterfall, much more valuable than that functional requirements spec. I mean, that's documented. It's fine to have it. It's required, and it's good. It's good from a contractual standpoint, especially if you're dealing with external vendors. But even then, we've run into misinterpretation. It's amazing.
Yep.
But so that's just my 2 cents on state requirements. And again, your solution script. So what are the boundaries? We need to try to avoid scripts to creep, and so hopefully you've got your solution script nailed down as you're evaluating the solution. Acceptance criteria. Again, I think of what are our user acceptance test cases that we want to test against. That evaluation hopefully happens earlier and then formally later at the end. Benchmarking and market analysis. So I guess that's when you're dealing with a solution. Maybe you're comparing solutions that a competitor does. Not sure. I haven't actually done something. I actually personally haven't done that myself. Business case. Again, hopefully you've got a good solid business case and it's not just winging it. Data mining. That's interesting. So I guess if you're dealing with something that's more weeds like that, and you can kind of roll it up and create some sort of pie charts or some sort of diagrams, if you have the opportunity to do that, that's great. Maybe, for example, if you can, your system is doing something, and in the back end it's hitting a database and it generates reports that you can read, and that'll give you some feedback. If you can do that, that's excellent. Decision analysis. So again, we have different tools of doing that to help us choose option A or option B. And be a fishbone diagram or some sort of decision tree. We can get a focus group involved. The focus group, we want to make sure you have the right stakeholders there. Metrics and KPIs. Hopefully that's been defined. Non-functional requirements, and that's getting into what I was saying earlier with performance, meaning that what are response times, what are upload times, what are, so response time might be screen to screen. Am I getting a lot of latency, that sort of thing. Observation, used to either provide feedback on perception. So maybe if it's an existing system, I might stand there and watch somebody do their job for half a day and just don't even say anything, just look at what they're doing, or maybe I'm there and I ask questions. Prototyping. and maybe you want to do some sort of storyboarding, or you actually have a solution that's something that's maybe just kind of a shell of a real solution in a demo environment. We talked about surveys, talked about use cases and scenarios, and then vendor assessments. And don't underestimate the importance of a vendor assessment. Choosing the right vendor can really make or break you. It's great that they can have something that's baked in, and you can just take it as is with maybe some configurations, but at the same time, you can be at the mercy of them. So I know, again, in farm environments, they go through a lot of stringent work to evaluate their vendors because they have to meet certain criteria. But even if you're not in a regulated environment like that, I think it's very important. All right, customers. So again, in my case, I have internal customers that I rely on feedback for, and those customers are often domain SMEs and end users. Oftentimes, for me, these are one and the same. Your end user is more, or your domain SME is more of your power user. May not always be the case, but sometimes what I find to be the case. PMs, I want to always make sure they're involved as much as they feel they need to be, and they're always an escalation point. Anytime scope, I'm sure you know this, but the key with PMs, anytime there's a change in scope or cost, you gotta let them know as soon as possible. Bad news is that's sort of warm when it comes to PMs. Same with your sponsors too. So the PMs may then escalate to the sponsor as needed. And then your regulators, they're always going to need to be involved to make sure that we're meeting regulatory requirements. I always find with regulatory and QA, as long as they're involved, they give you a standard set of requirements. As long as they're met, as long as they're involved, then there's not a problem. Just don't put them off to the end. And then our output is solution performance measures. So measures that provide information on how well the solution is performing or could potentially perform. All right, so wow, it's almost 8:30. I probably should stop here. So only 2 sections we got through, but I guess that's okay. I guess Robbie will just pick up with section 8.2. Did you have any other questions or feedback from me, or any comments?
Nothing from me.
No, me neither. Thank you for your stepping in, helping out here. Thank you.
Yeah,
Sure,
we
you're
really
welcome.
appreciate it.
Even though we had a small group.
All right.
Yeah, I thought it was just me, Heather, until you came on. If you could send that stuff on the business case, that would be great. And then these slides.
Yep. Sure, definitely. I'll be happy to do that. I'll probably get that to you towards tomorrow's an IIBA meeting, so I'll probably get that to you.
No worries. No worries.
Maybe I'll get it by the end of the week, and I'll probably get the recording out by the end of the week. I'm using GoToMeeting. I think Joe and Rob are using something else, but the link didn't work for me. So GoToMeeting has a 14-day trial period, but I'm going to save this to an MP4 file, and in worst case, I'll upload it to YouTube. But I'll make sure you have the recording.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks.